Hello, it's Amy, and I'm back again with the Journal of Emily Shore, published in 1891. This is the 1830s journal of a teenage girl living in the United Kingdom. And we are in the year 1837 on page 185, reading first of all the entry here for March 11th. And this is the entry for which we had an editor's note previously, which says, "Here follows a vivid picture of an illogical mind, a thing of which Emily had a keen and rather disdainful appreciation." March 11th. "Alack, poor girl! She, as I knew before indeed, is utterly incapable of arguing or reasoning. She takes for granted the point in debate. She starts away from the point. She says a vast deal that is quite irrelevant to the subject. She constantly overlooks some little fact or circumstance which entirely alters the matter, and she talks a great deal of nonsense. There is a little casuistry, and a little that is plausible at first sight, but there is nothing that will bear close examination or general application. In short, there is no depth in what she says. Besides, her judgment, though she denies it, is evidently warped by prepossession. She treats the subject unfairly, looks at it through a distorted medium, and deceives herself." And there's no more context than that. It's just a little bit of a rant on someone she feels is illogical, evidently someone who has annoyed her. And that's all we get, because then we're moving on to the entry for March 31st. "The spring of 1833 was one of the happiest times I have ever enjoyed. I have often, with A, laughed at poets and poetasters prating so much about the pensive recollections called up by the moon, as for instance, where Montgomery says, 'The moon's earliest glance that brings unto the homesick mind all we have loved and left behind.' But now I think it very reasonable and true, for natural and intelligible reasons, which, however, I suspect have rarely occurred to the poets. The moon, the heavens, and all the heavenly bodies are the only objects which are common at once to all places, of course in one hemisphere, and which can be gazed on and admired at the same moment by absent and distant friends. The very same golden moon which is gleaming at this moment before my eyes, I have often watched at Woodbury with equal delight, and at this moment perhaps is watched there with equal delight by my dear absent relatives. I cannot feel this with any other object. We breathe different air, we tread on different earth, we behold different features of terrestrial nature. We have different homes and different society, but there is one sun for both, one moon, one heavenly canopy to both. All that is celestial is the same." April 7th, Friday. Just here I was attracted by the cry of a bird quite new to me. It was like the baying of a lamb, and I instantly commenced a pursuit. I once or twice caught glimpses of it in the tops of high trees, and I was able now and then to observe it flying. It seemed to be a slender bird, somewhat of the willow wren shape, whitish beneath with black about the head or throat, but in all these points I may be mistaken, for I could see it with great difficulty. From the sound of its cry I should rather guess it to be a soft-billed bird. I tracked it from tree to tree, from hedge to hedge, from field to field. I crossed and recrossed lane, meadow, and stream, following it by the sound of its voice, sometimes far, sometimes near. The eager delight with which I engaged in the chase reminded me most strongly of past days, when in young and full strength I used to ramble for hours amongst the woods and fields of dear Woodbury, in unwearied search of some unknown warbler. How often, oh how often have I engaged in this delightful occupation. I have not been able to enter on one of these bird hunts for almost a 12-month, and oh how forcibly did it recall recollections of home and of old times. Alas, I can never hope again to see these enjoyments at Woodbury, which perhaps I may see no more. I was a long time watching the sunset. There were no very striking colors, but the mixture of bright light with heavy masses of purple cloud was very fine. Over the hills just behind the cathedral there was a tract of sky which passed, and I've lost my place. That's what happens when I look away from the book for a moment to check on the camera. Where did we get to? Which passed from an angry crimson to a kind of dull, lurid red. It was continually diminished by the clouds, slow sinking down and burying it beneath their heavy dark pall. But as long as any of it lasted, the cathedral towers shot up into the red sky with uncommon grandeur. Towards the north there was a very bright, pure lemon-colored light on which the naked tops of the trees seemed penciled out with exquisite clearness. But everything below the winding line, which traced out the summits of the hills, was melted into one undistinguished mass of misty blue. Hillsides, city, cathedral, all but its turrets, were confounded in the same dim, unvarying shade, where neither shape nor form could be discerned, so that one who knew not the place by day could not have guessed that in the long line of grey evening shades lay a great and populous town. The lights in the western sky had not yet faded away when the lamps in Exeter began to be lit, and a few brilliant stars of fire seemed suddenly to start into existence from out of the mass of blue in the distance. April 8th, Saturday. I observe more and more the difference in dialects between not only the songs of the chaffinches of Devonshire and Bedfordshire, but the different individual chaffinches of Devonshire alone. One which I heard today had a particularly fine variation. He greatly improved his song by the introduction of a clear, liquid, high note near the conclusion. I have not yet perceived that the same individual bird varies at all. April 10, Monday. In the evening I took up Kirke White's Remains. I can hardly make out whether I like his poetry or not. He has certainly a great mixture of the original and commonplace, and I must say he generally gives me the idea not of a self-taught poet, but of one who has acquired a perfection to the received language and everyday ideas of poetry. Kirke White was a youth of great genius, but I do not think his genius was equal to conceiving a poem in an original style, though he might be able afterwards to dress it up with an original invention. There is also in him a certain want of taste which makes it impossible for me to put out of hand any completely elegant little poem. Kirke White could not for his life have written Horace's ode, Qui multa gracilis, etc. And we have a editor's note here. We may be allowed here to allude to the justness of her poetical taste and power of judging for herself. A year or more before this, she had detected the merits of a then unrecognized genius, though she knew nothing more of him than the extracts given in an article of the Quarterly Review intended to turn him into ridicule. Those lines. She said, quoting the verses, "And through damp holts, new flushed with May, ring sudden laughters of the jay. I am sure are good." She praised also, though that too was laughed at, the image of the river, which in the middle of the green salt sea keeps its blue waters fresh for many a mile. I need not say that this unknown poet was Alfred Tennyson. At 18 years old, she became acquainted with the Lay of Elena in Taylor's Philip van Artevelde. A younger sister who had picked up it out of a volume of the same review repeated it to her, and the scene was not to be forgotten by those who witnessed it. Already an invalid, she lay on a couch, listening glowingly to that liquid lapse of melody and feeling. Occasionally she whispered to herself, "Lovely, music itself," then earnestly, with lifted head, "But I never heard anything like it," and finally, starting quite up, "The man ought to be canonized who wrote those verses." April 11th, Tuesday. I actually begin the 8th volume of my journal. It seems but the other day I began the first. I was writing it in the drawing-room of Brooke House. Papa, Mamma, poor Miss Hall, Lady Mulkin, and Sir Benjamin were in the room. Alas, such a party shall never meet again on earth. I well remember Benjamin peeping over at me as I wrote, and then, taking up the volume, he read a passage aloud for the amusement of the party. I think I can now see his good-humoured face and hear his pleasant voice as he said, in reference to the party he had just read, "This is quite an insult. You have mentioned Arthur's being of the party at the inn, and you have quite forgotten me." I think I can hear the laugh which followed as all declared that Ben was punished for his curiosity, while I protested that it was by pure accident that I had omitted his name, which he maliciously refused to believe. The commencement and conclusion of every new volume in my journal always seems a kind of era to me. I expect the one I have now begun to be highly important. It will most probably settle me in Hampshire, and perhaps launch me into the 19th year of my life. I wonder where we shall all be when this volume is concluded. I wonder which of our family will be together, and whether either of my brothers will have entered on any profession or means of gaining a livelihood. But oh, how impossible it is to calculate on the future. My occupations this day were as follows. I read the Bible, then worked, then wrote to Julia, then completed an index to the second volume of my journal, then began a note to Mrs. Arthur Malkin. Dinner came, after which I finished the note, wrote my journal, continued my drama, and sealed up the packet of letters which was to go to Lord Mayo. Then I spent some time in reading Kirkwhite's poems, and then read a chapter of Doddridge's Rise and Progress. After this, while evening was drawing on, I took up Gil Blas Courage, which occupied me till we sat down to tea at 7:30. After tea, I took up my work and continued it till prayer time, while Aunt Bell read to us the Pioneers. After prayers, I went up as usual to undress, came down in my dressing gown and sat by the fire, reading the Bible and looking to see the psalms and hymns, which came in turn for me to repeat that night. I then proceeded to curl my hair and go to bed, where, after having repeated a number of hymns and psalms, I fell into a painful train of retrospective thought, which kept me awake for some time. I looked forward also to the happy time of my return to Woodbury, and I amused myself with watching the scenes which, according to custom, seemed to rise up before my very eyes. One of these was a deep and awful ravine between two black, stupendous cliffs, down which I seemed to be looking. The scene lasted but an instant and then vanished. It did not return, and I endeavored to recreate it by tracing it out from the pencil of memory. But this, of course, produced a far less vivid impression. Finally, I fell asleep and dreamed that I was listening to a duet played by Anna and Phoebe towards the close of a still and beautiful summer's evening. Richard declares he saw a great many swallows or martins skimming over the river. It is very early for any species and extraordinary in weather such as this. If possible, I will go tomorrow and see them myself. And so we'll end it there for today.